Hi, Erwan Yusuf here. Today we are at Landers to talk about one of my favorite ingredients. It's funny how throughout the years, an ingredient that we take for granted nowadays on our tables used to be so important. We're talking about salt. Salt used to be one of the highest trading currencies in the world. It actually comes from the Latin word sal, which is the root word for salary, so it was that important. The salt that we have today is very different from the salt that we used to have, and obviously now it's become commonplace in your pantry. Salt plays a vital role in your overall health, which is why in the early 1900s, about 1924, people started adding iodine into salt because humans were slightly deficient in iodine. So let's talk about that. Iodine gets converted into iodide when it's in your body. That is really important for your thyroid function, and it's really important to make sure that a lot of kids, especially back then, weren't born with deficiencies. So that's why you still see a lot of iodized salt, because some people, different parts of the world, might not get iodine in their body or enough from their daily diets. Things like seafood, seaweed, those things actually give you lots of natural iodine. But if you can't have or don't have access to those types of ingredients, then you would need salt that is enriched with iodine. So for someone who gets enough iodine in their diet, you don't necessarily need to use iodized salt. When I do cooking videos, one of the most recurrent comments that I get most of the time is people telling me that I'm using too much salt, but that's simply because there are different variants of salt. So this might sound really weird, but all of these don't actually have the same levels of salt or saltiness. When you taste it, some will be milder, some will be bolder, which is why when I make pasta and I put literally a handful of salt in my water, it's actually not salty, it's just because I need more of that type of salt to flavor the food better. So let's go through the different types of salt. Two main categories. You have the sea salt and let's call it the rock salt for now. Sea salt is something that you've probably seen pictures of already, and this is salt water in certain parts of the world that is harvested, put in beds. This is extremely simplified. Then the sun actually acts as a natural dryer. Then you have salt crystals that form. That salt is then processed in different grounds or in flakes. That's where you find different shapes. Rock salt, on the other hand, is actually not edible and is not good in its purest form for the human body. It comes from underground, mostly around mountainous regions. You have these salt mines. You get these big chunks of salt that are then cleaned and processed. It can then be used to flavor your food, or it can then be processed to actually melt ice in countries where winter can get really harsh. So what we have here in front of us today, we have Himalayan salt. Himalayan salt is touted as one of the healthiest salts in the world simply because it has close to 84 different types of minerals in there. It's extremely rich, extremely good for the body. It's extremely expensive simply because it's hyper-localized and comes from a central part in Pakistan. And obviously, this is the only place in the world that does it, hence the scarcity, hence the price. So in front of us here today, like what we were talking about, different grinds for different purposes. So you have some fine salt. Usually when you have fine salt, for me personally, I like using fine salt to cook with because it dissolves better in the food and the water and the sauces and whatever you put it. Then you have salt crystals that are usually put in a grinder such as this. This is usually used for, personally, finishing salt because I like to actually see my finishing salt in the food rather than having a fine salt that dissolves in the food that you don't necessarily see with your eyes anymore. So that is the main purpose of grinds. So you'll have flakes, you have sometimes pyramids, you have fine salt, you have ground salt. The purposes vary and it really depends on you and how you want to use it, but that's my golden rule. Fine salt for sauce, stocks, water, while cooking. Flake salt, perfect for like steaks or anything you need shards on or you really want to feel that bite of salt right when you're eating. And finally, you have the more common salt grinder where you can have chunks, and which is also great, but can also be used for cooking salt. Kosher salt has become extremely popular, especially after the amount of cooking shows we have on TV. In a lot of these cooking shows, you'll see chefs using kosher salt. So kosher salt was traditionally used for the koshering process, which is basically drying something. So you would use this on like steaks or on fish or wherever you want the liquid to kind of evaporate, because salt does that. Salt makes liquid go away. So kosher salt is great for that purpose, but it also has a really mild flavor that for me is great for cooking. You might also find different variants of flavored salts like what we have here today. So we have an all-purpose seasoned salt. This is usually with a bunch of herbs, spices, garlic powders, onion powders, things like that, just to make your food more flavorful without necessarily having to add too much ingredients to it. Here we have one of the weirder salts, which is salt for beer, which I've never seen before, but I actually totally understand, because when you use salt in cocktails or beer or with alcohol, it actually does make the flavors a bit more complex. And a fun tip for you, especially when you're cooking and you're making cocktails, the effect of salt and the overall flavor of something that's sweet will actually increase its sweetness. And you can try this at home. Anything that's super sweet, add a little bit of salt, it'll become even sweeter, but it'll be more balanced. One of the most common things you'll find in these fine salts is most of them have anti-caking agents, which makes sure that when they come out, they're nice and dry, they can actually separate in your hands and they're not clumpy. Natural salt, especially when you come like, let's say fresh sea salt, a lot of it will be clumpy. If you ever used gray salt or sel de fleur, it usually clumps up because it has natural moisture in there. So another salt that doesn't use an anti-caking agent is pickling salt. So pickling salt is extremely pure, very strong, very flavorful, and is used to make pickles. And you just need to add a little bit of that. So you have different variants like that that are used for very specialized cases. I know these videos cover a lot of information, but I like looking at these products that everyone uses in their everyday but don't necessarily know too much about it. It actually forces me to research as well about these very mundane products but that have very rich histories and they're extremely important for our overall diet. So I hope you guys enjoyed that video. Thank you again for watching. Comment below and let us know what else you want to know about.